Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, airing weekly on WPVM-FM Radio Asheville and KCEI Cultural Energy Radio, Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Here's something you can keep in mind. WPVM-FM has been on air for over 10 years now. I've been airing this show on WPVM-FM for the last 8 years, and I've been airing this show in Taos, New Mexico on KCEI for the last 4 years. Community radio. One of the reasons I'm able to do this is because in both stations I have creative liberty to do almost anything I want in respect to my interviews, in respect to the commentary I offer you each week. And as you know, community radio is completely non-commercial. All of the people who donate their time, they donate it voluntarily. Here's why I donate my time. I donate my time because I love radio. I love communication. I love language. And I love the conversations I have with the people I talk to. So community radio belongs to all of us, the community we're in, Asheville or Taos. On that note, WPVM-FM in Asheville is hosting its first official fundraiser the last week of June. That's right now. So if you are in Asheville and you would like to support WPVM-FM, you can visit WPVMFM.org and make your gift today. $25, $10, $5, $50 if you can happen to spare it. We appreciate your support in whatever form you're willing to give it. WPVMFM.org to make that donation. And if you live in Taos, you can do the same for KCEI Cultural Energy Radio. The website is, you guessed it, culturalenergy.org. I'll say that one more time, culturalenergy.org. So once again, thank you ever so much for supporting community radio. We really do appreciate it. And now moving on to my guest today. Her name is Jennifer Peterson, and she is the founder of the Estelle Center for Creative Arts in La Veta, Colorado. I'm lucky to have Jennifer on the show today, and the reason why I've connected with her is because recently my creative collaborator Allegra Houston and I traveled north to La Veta, Colorado from Taos to host a weekend Imaginative Storm Writing and Creativity Retreat at her brand new Creativity Center. And we were so impressed with the way she handled everything that was going on during the weekend. It couldn't have been a better experience. And toward the end of the weekend, I said, "Hey, Jennifer, I'd love to interview you about how you made this dream of the Estelle Center for Creative Arts come true." And with no hesitation at all, Jennifer said, "Absolutely, I would love to be on your show." So as quick as I could, upon my return to Taos from La Veta, Colorado, I reached out to Jennifer, scheduled an interview, and what I'd like to do now is offer that interview to you. Jennifer begins by telling us where she grew up.
I grew up in southeastern New Mexico and had a grandmother who was the artist in my life and the creative in my life. So I learned how much I enjoyed working with my hands and how much I enjoyed bringing other people along on creative journeys, because that's what my grandmother did. So I had a dream in the early 2000s. I wanted to be able to create a space for women in particular to come together and for their creative journeys. So whether they already did an art form of some sort or they wanted to but didn't feel confident in doing that, I felt like it was just important to create a beautiful physical space and a welcoming physical space to invite women in to spend time exploring, working with their hands, whether it was paper collage or dyeing silk scarves, something sort of simple, but that gave them a creative outlet. My children were young at that time. The idea of opening a retreat center was just an idea and a dream. And I had a very wise friend tell me, you don't have to know exactly what that looks like or how you want to do it. You don't even have to research it yet. You know you don't have the time and the space and the energy to take it on now. You can just let it be a dream. That was some of the wisest advice I'd gotten, because I could just let it be a dream and I could think about it and vision the beauty of it. And I could pull pictures out of Sunset magazine, spaces that I loved and gardens that I thought were beautiful and rooms that were inviting to be in. And I would just stuff those in a folder, and that was my playtime, along with the quilting that I had taken up as a hobby at that point in my life. I just waited for that dream to percolate. All those years were really valuable time to let that happen. And it also gave me time to think about the legacy that my grandmother had left me kind of unknowingly. She was compelled to create art, and she painted in every medium. She had a potter's wheel and kiln and worked with clay, and she took any art class that she possibly could down in that little bitty town in southeastern New Mexico. And she was just an inspiration in that way. My happy place was just in her studio, where she would just let me dabble, and she would try to teach me some things. And I didn't go on and work in her mediums, but I did learn that I did enjoy working with my hands, and that there was a real calmness and peace that came over me when I was working with my hands. And I realized that that's an important piece of who we are as human beings. That was my motivation for wanting to open a space where people could come to learn and further their creative journeys, but also as a place to deliberately gather with friends, people you already are in relationship with. So that's where that idea came from. And I was just fortunate to discover this building back in 2018. Because I'm a quilter, I had taken a couple of independent 5-day retreats with Ricky Timms, who is an internationally known quilter, instructor, artist. He owned that building at the time. Those 5-day retreats propelled my creativity and my artistry as a quilter monumentally. And I went from, being stuck using patterns and rulers and being very rigid in my quilting to being able to create an improvisational quilts just in those 2 retreats. So I knew the building, and I knew sort of the magic that La Vida held. La Vida is a real draw for artists. It's very much an artist colony. It's a town of only about 800 people. So it's a great location. It's remote enough to be a retreat location, but it's also close enough to civilization that you can get to it. So it's really a great location for a retreat center. And when Ricky sold his building, when I noticed it was on the market, I thought, oh, I think this might be my opportunity. This might be the thing I've been waiting for, to start figuring out the logistics of how to make this dream happen.
Let me ask you to build a bit on the notion of the dream. Can you tell us a timeline from when the dream first emerged into your everyday awareness, and how long did it take for it to percolate until you finally opened the center? And what was the phenomenology of that percolation?
So my 3rd child was born in 2005, and I want to say it was probably about 2009. When your 3rd and final child turns 4, you kind of feel like you can step out of your house a little more and have a little more freedom, about 2009. So I think that's when the dream started happening. And that's when I'd been quilting since the year 2000. I wanted to continue in that, and I wanted to bring other people along in the creative journey, not just about quilting, but just about doing things with your hands. And one thing that I did, Navé, that definitely propelled this creation of a retreat center as a business was in 2013, I started what I call creative women's retreats. And I have access to a lovely ranch down in northern New Mexico. And so I decided I was just going to invite a group of women friends down for a long weekend over Labor Day weekend in 2013. And we would do a retreat with some deliberate creative activities. We did a group painting project in that instance. We cooked meals together. These were women that I knew well, most of them I knew quite well, but they didn't necessarily know each other because they were from different friend circles of mine. It was a risk for them in some way because they were coming on retreat, and they, in some cases, only knew me. So I hosted them. And another piece that's really important, I believe, to retreat is relationship and the formation and connections that happen in that time period. So these women, a lot of them ended up becoming friends with each other just because they would come spend the weekend with me at this ranch in New Mexico. We would do a group artistic project that was accessible to any kind of level. You didn't already have to be an artist. I never did a quilting project because not everybody knows how to use a sewing machine. Like a first year, we did a group painting project. We did a self-reflective time about your artistry or about your creativity that I would lead. And we'd make meals together, and we would draw names, and you wouldn't tell whose name you had, and then you needed to make something for that person, and we'd present that to each other the last night. So there was always a relationship and generosity that was a part of that. So I have continued to do those as different women would come into my life. There'd be different groups of people who would be invited and would be able to attend. I don't know that I recognized at the time that was a huge piece of my learning what a retreat center should be, but it was. And it was a safe space for me because they were all my friends. And they were going to be kind to me even if they didn't really like what we were doing. and something that was significant about that first year in Navé at 2013 was my grandmother was 95 years old, Estelle, and I had seen her in June that year, and she was definitely declining. And she was a vibrant person until the end of her life, and didn't have anything wrong with her except she was just old. So I got word during that retreat time that September. I got word from my dad that my grandmother was on her deathbed. Spoken to her on the phone in August, just a week before we left, and I told her what I was going to do. Said, Gran, I'm doing this because I know you would love this, and this is something that you would have done and did in her own way, because she was always bringing people along and introducing them to the artistry that she was participating in. And when I got word that she was on her deathbed and we were at the retreat, it was very emotional for me. It wasn't an accident that the timing was happening that way. She knew in her heart of hearts that she could pass her torch on. She knew I would continue her legacy of bringing people along on the creative journey. In her subconscious spirit, or maybe even her conscious spirit, she knew it was okay for her to go. That was the first time I did that, and I have done it every year since, except for 2020. It's been a joy. There have been so many relationships formed out of that go beyond me. I've experimented in different artist mediums to create projects that are accessible for people who don't do art on a regular basis. It's more than about working with your hands. It's about the connections that are built. It's about discovering the creative spirit, because we all carry that. We all carry that creative spirit. It exhibits itself differently. It doesn't have to be about making something with your hands.
Why do you think people are so drawn to creativity, quote unquote? It's common. We live lives that require a great amount of creativity, and yet you have this retreat, people are drawn to it. What's going on there culturally, do you think, that makes people so in need of these kinds of containers?
That's a really good question, Navé, and I think that the answer is multifaceted, and I can give you my observations of that. My first observation of that is because I'm a woman of faith and believe in God and believe He created us, we're made in His image, and He's the creator. And so we are all creative. We all are creators in our own rights. So I think that's the basic truth. Why we have that need, what satisfies us about being creative, it's just that we need something beyond ourselves. We need something new and exciting. As much as we may love routine, there's still, I think, a need for something new. And there's a pride that happens in us when we can look at something that we've created, whether it's a business plan or a pot or a quilt. Like, we can look at that and go, that was an idea that came out of my soul, came out of my spirit, came from my mind. As human beings, I just think that we need that. We're not robots. The other piece of it is the mental health and emotional health, the peace that comes from working with your hands. I've come to the point in my life that I actually schedule my creative time, because if I don't spend as much time on it because I'm busy with my business project and making the retreat center run and family and all of that. So if I schedule my creative time and I don't book appointments over the top of that, and then I have that hour of time each day, and I'm not 100% at it. I tell myself if I can accomplish this to a level of 80%, then I will be successful. But if I have that time to get my hands on fabric, it doesn't have to be a fabulous project. It can just be sewing some scraps together, but just get my hands on fabric, get those creative juices flowing, get into that zone, that rhythm that artists get into. It just makes the rest of my day, the rest of my life, the other decisions I need to make, when the problems arise, it makes those things a little easier to deal with. It's a balm. It's a salve. It's just something that soothes our spirits and clearly gives us the ability to function in the day-to-day muck that comes up that's unavoidable.
That analysis suggests there are categories of functionality in human existence, in human business. The muck, not so creative. I have to do the ordinary business of life. The creative, I'm painting, I'm making a photograph, I'm doing something that feels creative. I wonder why we have those categories. What causes that? Where does that come from? And the reason I'm asking is, why could we not expand the sensibilities around creativity to include the muck as a creative act?
I agree. And if we can reach that level where we can see the creative possibilities in the day to day, when you're cleaning the bathroom, when you're mopping the floor, I did it with cooking dinner. When my children were young, my main focus was them and running the household and keeping things running so my husband could do his job outside the home. I thought, well, I need to do something creative. And so cooking became my creative outlet. I thought, well, I have to fix dinner every night. I have to feed everyone. So I might as well make this darn good. And I might as well spend some time researching best way to build flavor and and create healthy meals from scratch that are going to benefit my family, but at the same time satisfy my desire to be creative and my desire to have a beautiful end result. Yes, I do think that it's important to find ways to be creative in the daily routine, in the things that could just become drudgery. And I think that is that higher level of evolving as human beings, is if we can turn those daily experiences, which could become mundane and boring, into something creative. I think that's what separates us from the animal kingdom. Like we have that ability to turn something into a creative joy.
Does it separate us from the animal kingdom, or does it distinguish us for the qualities we have within the context of the animal kingdom?
I think the latter.
You've given me an interesting idea. Cooking. Cooking is considered one of the highest artistic, creative realms one can participate in when you move into the 4-star Michelin restaurants. There's no chef that has a Michelin star who would say, I am not a persnickety, demanding artist, and I always have been. I think it's kind of ironic that people cooking in the kitchen don't really get all bundled up about cooking in the kitchen. It's not an art form, and yet they're doing something that is one of the top art forms ever around the world for centuries, ages and ages and ages. Unlike writing or other creative forms, people have those so distinctly separated, they get all bundled up about being good writers or good quilters or good this or good that. It's not good enough. And yet when I'm boiling water or you're boiling water, I'm participating in a spectrum that has the highest art available to us at the end of that spectrum. I just think that's interesting.
It is. And I think the other interesting thing about cooking in particular, Navé, is that the most well-known best chefs in the world are mostly men. And yet cooking was relegated to the woman in the household and looked upon as a lesser than job than what the man went out and did during his day. I find that very interesting as well, that we have a big distinction between the day-to-day cooking that you do for your family, and who does that, and then who excels at that 4-star or 5-star Michelin restaurant.
And now that you mentioned it, that's quite true. Women have a very difficult time competing in that arena when they try to break in.
Like any other male-dominated arena where there's an exceptional top tier of.
And yet in the writing arena, women have as much a place in writing as men do, maybe more so, depending on who you talk to. It's a fairly equal thing, which brings me around to another question for you, and I'd like for you to reflect on this. You say you opened the Estelle Center for women in particular. When I do workshops, I tend to be the only man in the room. At our event at your place this past weekend, I was the only man in the house.
Yep.
Save for a few fellows walking by with their dogs early in the morning. That was about it. Why do you think women are so drawn to this? What are they trying to achieve? What needs do you think they're fulfilling?
I wonder if it has to do with the deep desire that women have for community and fellowship with other women. And I'm not saying men aren't relational. In fact, I think men are more relational than culture and society allows them to be or wants them to be. But for women, we desire connecting with other women. Most of us are not loners. Most of us have a lot of women friends that we rely on. There's a creativity in building relationship. If you're going to be in a long-term friendship with someone, you have to keep it interesting. You have to stay interested in each other and continue having that listening ear, and being able to speak wisdom into each other's lives requires creativity. So I think then that there's a natural outworking of wanting to then create together, because just a week ago I pulled together three friends and we sat around my dining room table and we did artist trading cards, which is just a little niche of collage, the collage world, paper collage world. And just for fun, we pulled out the scraps of paper and magazines and ribbon and whatever we all had collected, and the glue and old deck of cards. And each of us made about four artist trading cards and sat and visited. And so I think that's the other piece. When you do something together with other women, there's always conversation. There's always talk. Something about having your hands busy at something, I think it just expands the creativeness of the conversation. There are times that you're at a quilting retreat, you're working very intently on your own piece, but there's always room to get up and connect with someone and look at their work, and you're inspired by their work. I want to promote with the Estelle Center is how creativity happens in community. Say, for instance, 12 people gather to take a class from a well-known quilt instructor. I'll use Irene Roderick as an example. She taught for us last year in 2024, and it was an outstanding retreat. 12 of us in the class. I was one of her students as well. Everyone came with their own ideas of what they wanted to create, and they all came with different skill levels. They all came with different design ideas. And to be in the room together and just absorbing their creative spirits, absorbing who they were with integrity in the room as creatives, it propels everyone else's creativity. Every time I go to a retreat, whether it's instructional or not, I leave with something I've made that I go, I didn't really know I had that in me. I wasn't sure I could do that. And look what I just accomplished. Not just because I was learning from this instructor, but also because I was observing and absorbing everyone else's creativity. That's the piece that's so important, that we don't get too hung up on the YouTube videos and the online classes, but we make an effort to go be in person with other creatives, because it propels us forward even further, I believe.
And you're describing surprise. The outcome surprised me, even though I've done this before.
Mhm.
You said deep desire for community when women gather. Meaning would be in that as well. Communication and listening. I would like for you to reflect on listening within the context of these conversations that people have within the retreat. How is it done? Why do you think it has the value it has? And I'm assuming you think it has value. Unpack that a little bit for us, if you would.
That's a great question. Listening can be done in multiple ways, I think. Sometimes listening, I think, is intuitive. Watching how someone creates something is a way of listening, I think. We come to our creative processes, the product that we end up making, the piece that we end up making, all of that's informed by our histories, our own personal histories and our own experiences. So talking with someone about their creative journeys, where they've been, how they started, how they got to where they are, other retreats they've been to. That's an important piece of listening. But the other important piece of listening, I think, and the thing that's really beautiful about a 5-day retreat is by the 5th day, and you go out to dinner that last night, these 12 women have become a little family. And you hear bits and pieces of their past, their personal lives, their husbands, their children, their childhoods. You hear bits and pieces of all of that. All of that forms who we are, feeds into our creative journey and into what we produce as an artist. That's definitely a form of listening, whether you're listening to them talk about themselves or you're asking questions to get them to talk about themselves, asking questions of, why did you put that color there? Tell me what made you want to cut the fabric in that shape and place it there. Why did you choose to put those two colors together? All of that is finding out a little bit more of who that person is.
When you're listening in these environments, how do you know how to trust what you hear? How do you know how to intuit the truth of what somebody is saying? Is that an intuition, a feeling, an intellectual discernment?
I think that's different for every person. I'm the type of person, I deal very honestly and directly with people. And I anticipate that everyone else is doing the same with me. I'm shocked at how sometimes that isn't true. So when I'm listening to someone, I'm really just taking what they're saying at face value and realizing that it's, what they're saying is coming from a deep place in their hearts. And we don't necessarily understand the origins of what we say, right? Because we're so complex and we're a blend of so many things that have happened to us. We're a blend of who we're created to be in the purest of form, and then we're blended with all of the environmental factors, all of the things that have happened to us. So I try to give people a lot of grace when I'm listening, but I'm also just assuming they're being honest with me. That's what I'm hoping. I think that's how we progress as a society better, if we can just be honest and gracious with each other. I'm assuming honesty when I listen.
Well, it's an easy thing to assume, and you might as well assume it. I'm curious about one other thing you said, 5-day retreat, a family emerges from the 5-day retreat. In your experience facilitating these kinds of offerings, when does that family start to coalesce in the course of that 5-day period? And what are the elements that build into that structure of family?
That's a great question. I would say in most cases, it happens pretty quickly. I would say by the second morning, the second day. The elements they have a lot to do with the instructor. Like in any setting, when you have a leader of a group, the leader often sets the tone. My husband taught elementary school for 25 years, had 3 or 4 different principals in that time. And he always said the principal sets the tone for the school. And it made a difference, really made a difference. The year that the principal wasn't so great, he's like, maybe I need to change schools. And he didn't. The principal moved on. But there is that element when there's a leader to something, even if that leader is very much serving them, because a good leader serves. A good leader doesn't just force their way through whatever they're doing. A good leader serves those that they're guiding. So when a leader is very friendly, gracious, positive in how they give correction or criticism or instruction, that makes a big difference. So that breaks down barriers. If someone's not pulling something together well, but there's still an element of what they're doing that is salvageable and can be built on, and the instructor takes the time to focus on that and direct them in that way, that's huge. If you're in a teaching setting where you don't feel like you're qualified to be there, the bonds don't form. If it's just about criticism, there's one right way and it's my way. So that doesn't work well. So I think that's a big piece of it. And then people's hearts are open to, oh, well, I can do this and I can do more. And then you start complimenting the other women in the class and saying how much you love what they're doing. And so it just sort of builds. The bonding can happen very quickly, definitely by the second morning. And having meals together is a big piece of it too. I mean, food is always a way to community, a way to relationship. So we do provide meals as part of our retreat. So when you're forced to go eat together, you start having conversation and building bonds with the person you're sitting next to or across from. And so, yeah, that's a big piece of it as well. Good food, good fellowship, good creative time together. And those bonds happen really quickly with women.
You make me think about the leader of these retreats. You lead retreats, you lead the Estelle Center, you set the tone. We followed your tone when we came as facilitators. We were also instructors and facilitators. We were teachers, Allegra and I. We were leaders. Can you reflect just a little bit for us on the differences between an instructor, a facilitator, a teacher, and a leader, and how do those four elements quilt together to make a strong form to carry a retreat forward to a successful completion?
Well, I would say an instructor and a teacher are kind of synonymous. Like in your case, yours and Allegra's case, you taught, you instructed, you gave principles, you gave examples of what you were wanting people to learn. But the facilitation piece was extremely important to what you did, and you did very well at that. And facilitation, I think, is where people really feel included. You're asking them to contribute, to bring what they have to the table, and you're valuing that. That's used to teach the others in the class as well. So the facilitation, I think, that gets the conversation going, that gets the ideas out in the open, and then everybody's learning from that. Facilitation is an equalizing factor. A good facilitator, yes, they're leading, they're part of the group too. They're sending the message that there's no one person that's higher than another person in the group. That's something that I find often in quilting groups. Most of the time, quilters are really great people and want to see others succeed. There's nothing wrong with competition in general. Art shows all the time where people put their art in and it's judged and juried, and there are winners and there are not winners. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a recognition of a high level of skill and artistry. But in a learning setting, I don't think the competition is appropriate. So a facilitator, a leader, an instructor, I think their job is to keep the competition out of the whole thing, make it an environment that is conducive to living your best creative life, stepping into the fullness of the creativity potential that you have in your heart, which I think all of us have a lot more creative potential than we ever really reach in this lifetime. I just think there's so much more in each of us than we can really access in the world that we live in. We're trying to tap into that as much as we can in these settings. And I think a good facilitator who's helping everyone open up, a good instructor who's giving tools. I mean, we need the tools, especially when you're doing an art form that requires some kind of technical ability. Like you have to know how to use your sewing machine. You have to know how to use a rotary cutter if you're a quilter. If you're a potter, you need to know how to use the potter's wheel. You need to know how the clay works so that you can put it together in a way that it stays together and doesn't fall apart, or it isn't too heavy, or it never dries in the middle because it's too thick. There's technique. Photography is a huge example. There's a ton to know about settings on your camera. Even 30 years ago, everybody thought they could be a photographer. So there's a whole lot more to it than what your iPhone can do for you. There's technique that needs to be shared. And that's the job of the instructor, right? You've got to have the tools. Learning from another human being is, I think, an important thing. That everyone has different learning styles. I prefer to learn from another human being. I will call and ask someone a question before I will Google it because I don't want to look it up. I want someone to tell me because I want the relationship piece. If I know someone who knows the answer, I'd much rather call that person. So that's the setting I'm trying to get us back to, because I think we've gotten very dependent on just Googling things. Not that that's not helpful. Yes, that can be helpful. But the relationship piece where the facilitator, the teacher, the leader is connecting with you in a way that when you didn't do it right, you can say, well, why didn't this work? Google can't really answer that for you, but an instructor can pick up what you just did and say, oh, here's the problem, and here's how you can fix that. And that's the other piece is that my very first quilting teacher, her name was Donna Mae Norris, and she's passed on now, but she was fabulous. She laughed a lot, and no mistake was unfixable. No mistake was too big, and it was no big deal. And she'd say, it's okay, it's not going to Paducah. And Paducah, Kentucky hosts a huge quilt show every year, and people try to get their pieces in. And she would say, it's okay, it's not going to Paducah, we'll fix it. So those are the type of instructors that I want at the Estelle Center. So back to the Estelle Center, we do an extensive interview process with our potential instructors because we want people who are there who aren't saying, hey, what I'm teaching, there's only one way to do it, and everybody's got to follow exactly the way I do it. And that is not the type of instructor we want at the Estelle Center. We want the type of instructor who wants to help each person explore their own creativity, their own artistry, and find their own paths with the tools that the instructor gives. Very important. We also want that instructor to be a relational person, someone who enjoys getting to know their students, going to have lunch with them, going to have dinner with them, sharing about the journeys of life, talking about things outside of the art medium that they're teaching. It's important because, again, if we're comfortable in a setting relationally, we're going to be so much more free to experiment, make mistakes, maybe fail at something, knowing that, hey, there's a way out of this, and there's still a way to successfully create something in this week. You've got to feel emotionally safe. You know, you and Allegra did that really well with the writers, and writing is an even more of a deep dive into the heart and the soul of a person, but any art form is. And so people have to feel emotionally safe to feel like they can experiment and not do well, but find a place that they are doing well. And it's important that instructor meet each person where they're at creatively. I had an experience back in 2010. I didn't do well in a class. It was kind of beyond my skill level and beyond my comfort level. And the teacher wasn't great at making me feel comfortable where I was. And that was a sort of a painful experience. Now, I took it and pushed myself and let the discomfort push me to another level in my artistry. And I was glad I'd accomplished that. But in the middle of it, it wasn't a lovely feeling. I'm actually glad I had that experience because I want to avoid that for my guests. You know, I want the instructor to be someone who can nourish them no matter where they're at.
One of the things that worked for us when we were working at your space for 2 days, we could have done 5, would have loved to have done that, maybe in the future. We turned to you because you were the leader of the center. We turned to you for your authority, your final call on things, your willingness to listen to what we said and yet tell us what you needed. As we move toward the end of our time together, I'd like for you to reflect a bit on authority and how the good leader uses that final say-so. And sometimes you have to take maybe a slightly strong stand to get your point across. So how do you view that sense of authority as a leader? And then what are you planning to do with the Estelle Center as we move into the rest of 2025, 26, 27, and going forward? And then we'll close with that.
Back to that concept of serving those that you're leading, I think that's very important. Learning their needs and trying to meet them as best you can. And you can't do it all. And sometimes their needs aren't even appropriate for you to be meeting. So there is a level of discernment there that can be sort of tricky, I think. I want to create a space that is welcoming and conducive to learning. And so if a situation arises that's trying to demolish the emotional space that I've created, then yes, that's the place where the leader has to step in and say, well, you know what, this can't continue. And so we have to change how this is going. I think that's where the authority comes in, is it's the authority to keep the space following the mission. And the mission is to create the space, create a welcoming environment for people to explore their creative hearts. I do believe that when we create the space for that, whether it's an emotional space, physical space, a community space, people leave that setting and they go back to their communities and they make their communities better because they're in a better place in their hearts and in their souls. And they've experienced love and acceptance and a push along in their creative journeys and their artistry, and they come back fulfilled. And so they can't help but spread that to the people they know and love back home. And so that's the piece that I think is very important when I think beyond the walls of the Estelle Center. We live in a really tumultuous world and a chaotic time. And we have to create the world that we want to live in. Like, we're responsible for that. We can't just let the world happen to us. So as artists, that's our job. Yes, I'm an artist, but I'm so social. I can't spend all my time working on my art. I have to be with people. So if I'm going to be with people, I'm going to create a setting where they feel so good about what they're doing creatively that they can go out and continue the good-heartedness, the graciousness, the gratitude that all of us need to be living with in the midst of fear, pain, chaos, all this stuff of life that's no fun. We have to step in and not let that world just happen to us. We have to step in and create a space that is loving and welcoming and creative for other people. So if I create that for a group of people who can come to a retreat, the ripple effect is they're going to go create that in their worlds. That's very important. So that's my long-term philosophy for a retreat center. We're building our programming around that, whether it's bringing people in for instructional retreats in various art mediums or doing what we can for the Levita community itself, because that's important as well. We partner with the Levita Public Library, the Levita Creative District. We're just continually looking for ways that we can bring local Levita folks into the center to have those same kinds of experiences.
So if people listening are interested in coming to work with you or coming for an event as a participant, give us a quick overview of how they can connect with you and what they need to do. And
certainly, our website is Estelle Creative Arts. Our Instagram handle is also Estelle Creative Arts, and Facebook, same, Estelle Creative Arts. So you can find us those places. We have 4 more classes this summer, 4 more retreats this summer, 3 quilting classes with kind of big name quilting instructors. And then we have a mixed media textile. So again, in the fiber art world, but it mixed media textile class in September. So those are our opportunities for this year. If you want to come to Levita and you're into fiber, you're into quilting, that's your place to be. And a lot of these classes are fine for beginners as well. So look at our website, read the class descriptions, Estelle Creative Arts. I've hired a wonderful woman named Sunshine Caulfield who lives in Levita, and she's the executive director and keeps things rolling in Levita. So you would interface with her if you are connecting through our website. She and I are interviewing artists for our 2026 schedule. So we will have that up and rolling by late fall. So that schedule will be public. So one exciting thing we're doing is a dance residency in August. So I have a dancing group who's performing at the Dairy Center in Boulder, Colorado in September. And they're coming to do a several-day intensive rehearsal in our space. I've given them the space to come and do that. And as the trade-off, they are doing a couple of performances in Levita. So the Levita folks will have the opportunity to see this amazing dance performance. And that's something Levita folks don't get to do unless they drive out of town to see a professional dance performance. So that's one of the things we're doing that benefits the local people. So yes, we're just working towards expanding into other mediums beyond quilting. We started with quilting because that's my medium. We're just continuing to find ways to create the world we want to live in.
Jennifer Peterson, thank you for taking the time out of your day to be with us on Twice 5 Miles Radio.
It has been a pleasure, Navé. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Jennifer Peterson, founder of the Estelle Center for Creative Arts in La Vita, Colorado. If you've never been to a writing and creativity retreat, you may be wondering how something like that might work. If you have been to a writing retreat or a creativity retreat or other kinds of retreats, you have a sense of how the groups coalesce, how the groups come together, how the facilitators help all this happen, as Jennifer and I talked about in our conversation. So Jennifer gave you a pretty good idea of how one of these retreats works. The main thing is safety. Second thing is good facilitation. Third thing is high participation with the people who are in the circle. My creative collaborator, Allegra Houston, and I focus on writing, and we also focus on creativity. And as I've often said on this show, when you focus on your creativity, you really are focusing on an abundance that you were born with. We are creative people by nature. We also focus on organization. When you focus on your creativity, you're actually focusing on how you organize that abundance that you were, as I said, born with. And when you start thinking about your creative potential from the point of view of abundance rather than the point of view of lack, it changes things dramatically. You see potential and possibilities that you maybe haven't thought of before. That creative range that's there has always been there, and when you think of that range as large rather than limited, almost anything can happen. The only limiting factor here is how willing are you to throw yourself into something that you've always dreamed of doing. Jennifer gives us a good example of that, the Estelle Center for Creative Arts. She threw herself into it. She made her dream come true. It's a matter of organization as much as it is a matter of the creativity that you were born with. I'd like to give a shout out here to Julia Cameron and the Artist Way. Julia and I worked together for many years in the mid-90s when we hosted the Artist Way Creativity Camps in Taos, New Mexico. If you are unfamiliar with the Artist Way, Julia Cameron wrote that book in the late 80s, the early 90s. It rose out of creativity workshops she was hosting around the country. And now, all these years later, the Artist Way still sells 500,000 copies a year. So it's a proven method for freeing your creativity. It's been used by many, many, many people. And because of Julia's book, The Artist Way, that's how I came to first understand how creativity, abundance, and organization go hand in hand when we are trying to make the things that we have been called to make. And I've always been in the poetry community as well, so creativity, poetry, writing, it all fits together in a nice, wonderful little package that can serve you, and it certainly has served me. So at the retreat Allegra and I hosted at the Estelle Center, we focused on writing, based on a book that Allegra and I have written titled Write What You Don't Know, which is really a play on the advice that you'll get in many writing workshops, which is write what you know, which is certainly good advice, and yet sometimes what you know becomes so official and you get so stuck to it that you forget that there's a lot of material inside your imagination that you haven't discovered lately or you have forgotten about. And when it bubbles up, you often will say, I didn't know I knew that, even though it was in there and somehow you did know it. So write what you don't know is an encouraging call to action to look deeper into your own experiences, your own psychology, those things that are hidden inside of you, and bring them up and write about them. So our book, Write What You Don't Know, has a lot of prompts in the book designed to spur your imagination to bubble up those things that you have forgotten or you didn't know you knew that are just waiting to come out and be written about. The book has 10 sessions. And session 2, titled Let Rip, is a lot of fun because in session 2, we encourage people to do just that. Let rip, misbehave, do things they wouldn't really do in public, write the way they want to in a very sometimes ferocious, sometimes radical, sometimes disrupt the status quo kind of way. And we have 2 exercises in there that are most particularly interesting. Number 1 focuses on what you hate, and number 2 focuses on what you love. Indeed, love and hate are very powerful emotions. The focusing on hate that we ask people to do has a bit of humor to it. We don't ask people to focus on the big hates they have. We ask people to focus on the little hates they have. You might hate, like I do, the sound of water pouring into a cup. So it's not really a hate more than it is a disruptive dislike that you could call a hate. But imagine a rant about how much you hate pouring water into a cup. What would you do with that? Conversely, we ask people to write about what they love. And again, not the great loves of your life, but the little loves that nobody would expect you to have. Like, I like walking into big box stores like Walmart, Target, Home Depot. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because when I was a little boy, my mother took me to the grocery store, and I loved walking into the grocery store. If that's not a big box store, I don't know what is. So we have found that both of these prompt writings, what you hate and what you love, generate some very interesting, really insightful pieces of writing driven by genuine emotionalism. When you write about what you love and write about what you hate, it does generate some emotional tones, you got to admit. So we start by asking people to list 10 things that they absolutely love or absolutely hate. And Allegra and I do the exercises too. So this past time at the Estelle Center, I listed 10 things that I absolutely love. And I try to list different things. We love a lot of things. And one of the things that popped out on my list that really surprised me, because I am not Catholic, and yet I wrote, I love clumsy priests. I was surprised to see I had written it. So because it had energy, I circled, I love clumsy priests. And then I wrote for 10 minutes about how come I love clumsy priests. So as a way of closing the show, I'd like to read that for you now. Here we go. I love clumsy priests in large churches. I can't tell you exactly why. I'm not Catholic, and I don't know many priests, crosses on chains dangling on their chests. Why clumsy priests? Why not agile priests with sharp eyes, well-meaning fellows who sing their joyous songs? I'll tell you why. They're predictable and all too trim and certain. I prefer clumsy. I'll bet those clumsy priests worship a clumsy god and smoke cigars when nobody's looking. I love clumsy priests in large churches. Could those wobbly beauties rambling up the stairs to the clanging bells and the wild black belfries be that clumsy? Could these clumsy priests almost be ghost spirits longing for one night when they could go back and forth on a ferry, eat an apple, tell a lie or two, and buy a newspaper that had a good headline for once, just once? Clumsy priest in large churches know secrets you and I can never know, and the priests will never tell. And so there you go. That's my little 10-minute timed writing. I did edit it a bit, but not all that much. Actually, what I do is I take the prompt, generate 10 minutes of timed writing, doing it longhand, and then I read it aloud, as we always do in the group, because reading aloud helps to build confidence. It also gives me a sense of what works and doesn't work in the piece, and it keeps me connected emotionally to the piece because my guard is down. I'm not trying to perform. I'm just reading it to see what will happen. And I often, very, very often, will record it on my smartphone with my voice memo, and then I transcribe what I recorded into text and work with that. So there's a lot of combinations that can go on in this creativity organization notion that I've been talking about. And then the other thing that happens in a group, as Jennifer pointed out in our conversation, there's a group energy that happens. Everybody supports everybody else. It's not competitive. It's supportive. And something about that support seems to really make the creative energy, the organizational inclinations people have, very sweet, without any kind of force. It's all easy and open like a flowing stream. And creativity and flow go hand in hand. Mess and creativity go hand in hand. And confidence. Confidence is not something that you just get and keep. It actually can be banked, like putting money in the bank. So confidence, mess, currency, creativity all go together. So if you've been bundled up with your creativity, if you've been thinking I'm a little blocked, well, there's some truth to that. Maybe you are a little blocked, but I don't think people are ever as blocked as they think they are. All you have to do is breathe deep, enjoy the air, appreciate the fact that you were born a creative human being, and all you have to do is lean into the organization that you have understood all your life and make something happen. Make a dream come true, like Jennifer made her Estelle Center come true. A dream is a dream, and then when you take action, it becomes reality, and it's a gift to the world. Hey, world changing. How about that? We all can do it. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you ever so much for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé. We air every week on WPVM FM and also every week on KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio. I'd like to thank Walter Parks for our theme song, walterparks.com. For more on Walter's music, thank you to Devine Dial for managing WPVM FM Nashville, Robin Collier for doing the same, KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. If you'd like to reach me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. Navé is spelled N-A-V-E. And as I said at the beginning of the show, WPVM FM is hosting their first fundraising week, which is right now. So if you'd like to make a donation to WPVM FM to keep community radio on the air, WPVMFM.org is a good place to go. $5, $10, $20, $25. I feel like an auctioneer right now, but you get the point. Also, you can go to culturalenergy.org if you're in Taos and you'd like to support KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio. And with that, thank you ever so much for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio. I really do appreciate it. And I do hope you come back sometime soon. And until then, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.